African countries have contributed little to global carbon emissions, but they are among the most vulnerable to climate change shocks. So how do we fix this? And in fixing it, are there benefits for the continent? Let's find out. This is Insights from Africa. I'm Bronwyn Seaborn, and on this episode, we take a look at the interconnectedness between building climate resilience and growth in Africa. Well, climate change is an increasingly serious threat to Africa, with no country on the continent left unscathed by its impact, and this prompting the highest levels of government to take note. Here's Kenya's President, William Ruto.
Africa has contributed least to the climate crisis, yet bears its harshest consequences. Responsibility is not about guilt. It is about opportunity. We cannot change the past, but we can define the future by embedding climate action in every path of development. As the global economy shifts to low carbon and digital production, Africa stands at a crossroads. With our resources, we can build prosperity on a green foundation, and it is encouraging that our banks are beginning to see this potential. Yet the crisis is real. Kenya has endured 3 multi-year droughts in just 15 years. Last year, Southern Africa faced power cuts of up to 20 hours a day. These are not statistics. They are lived tragedies, and resilience is no longer optional. It is imperative.
And as in Kenya, Namibia has also felt the impact of climate change. Let's take a look at what the Southern African nation's president, Netembo Nandi-Ndaitwah, has to say.
Namibia, like many African countries, has done little to cause climate change, but we are among those who suffer most from it. We are experiencing hotter weather, less predictable rainfall, and an increase in droughts and floods. These are not just environmental challenges. They affect our economy and the lives of our people. Last year, Namibia faced one of the worst droughts in recent memory. Crops failed, animals died, and many families struggled to put food on their tables. Africa should not wait for tomorrow. We need to act today, as real progress depends on all of us. Similarly, in this rapidly evolving geopolitical environment, Africa needs to transform its challenges into opportunities. Together, across sectors and borders, we can build a strong, greener, and more resilient future for the Africa we want.
With the time being now, as so well put by the Namibian president, Standard Bank hosted its 5th annual climate summit to bring key players from the continent together to discuss how Africa can build resilience in the face of climate change, and more importantly, to uncover just how closely linked the topics of climate change resilience and economic prosperity are. For example, the notion of a just transition exemplifies how energy can be secured in an environmentally friendly way, while ensuring that this is done with poverty alleviation at the forefront. I attended the summit and caught up with Deepak Patel there. He's the head of climate finance at the South African Presidential Climate Commission, and I asked him about what a just transition actually means in practice. Here's more.
Before the word just was added to it, everyone was saying transition, and everyone was talking about a climate transition. Whereas we in South Africa, and I think it's also valid for the rest of Africa and certainly all other developing countries, where the emissions that we have historically contributed to, global warming, and continue to contribute, are a minuscule part of what the developed world has historically and continues to contribute. And so if we were going to have any transition that was driven by a concern about emissions, in order to have a climate response that is a safeguard then for all of humanity, I don't want to be overly dramatic here, then we are saying that from a South African or an African perspective, We cannot just be told to emit less because we emit little anyway, and that we understand that energy is absolutely critical to a future that has growth, jobs, and economic competitiveness. And so we make the point that if we are to make our fair share contribution to emissions reduction, then it must be accompanied by a developmental pathway as well. And so when we talk about a just transition, we're talking about reconciling and integrating climate responsiveness with socioeconomic development. And if you wanted me to unpack that further, in South Africa, we made a very bold step 2 or 3 years ago under the guidance of the Presidential Climate Commission, where rather than just talking about it being just, we asked the question, what is a just transition? And we came up with 3, for want of a better word, categories of justice. One is distributive justice, which means that as we make this transition, whether it's in energy, whether it's in the transport and other sectors of our economy, that all the benefits that accrue from such a just transition must in fact be shared amongst everybody. But the flip side is also true, where we are saying those people who damage the environment more must bear the cost and the burden of that damage. So that is distributive justice. Then there is restorative justice. And restorative justice is about ensuring that people who have paid the price in the past, as well as continue to pay the price of emissions, whether it's a result of health, whether it's as a result of other issues related, for example, to economic growth and jobs, that those people need to have some kind of safety net so that they don't fall between the cracks as we make this transition. And then finally is something called procedural justice. Here I like to borrow from activists, and they say, or have coined the phrase, nothing about us without us. And therefore this idea that researchers or academics or politicians or corporate head offices can make decisions and expect all of society to simply fall in line does not work, and that we need to pay very concerted attention to education, engagement, negotiation, and where possible, to ensure that communities that are going to be impacted by the transition actually have a say in what that transition looks like.
Is it valuable then to view the climate or just transition, the climate debate, the just transition, through a lens of equality and growth, more importantly? Because it seems like the two have diverged and yet are so intricately linked, particularly in a South African context.
I think that's absolutely true. So if you look at the Presidential Climate Commission, now we're a statutory organization, Schedule 3 institution in terms of the Constitution. Previously we were a presidential commission. Our brief and mandate is to do the research, interrogate the science, explore the empirical evidence, but amongst the commissioners come a wide range of representatives from all of society. And we take that science, we take the logic, we take the empirical evidence, and we try to come to a consensus. But more important than that, we talk about the just transition having economic development, reduction of inequality, jobs, and growth as a key objective and outcome, which if is not met, then any climate response is considered, in our case, to be inappropriate.
What catapults us forward now? Is it financing that really gets this started?
It's a number of things. I think finance is a critical part of the debate, but so is policy, and so are regulations. And I can say that while there are those who rue the fact that government is slow, there have been a number of policy changes made by the President in the electricity sector, and now increasingly visible in the transport sector, which will ensure that the kind of finance which we know cannot come from the fiscally constrained environment needs to then come on a blended basis and in fact powered by the private sector. And unless you create the conditions where the private sector is willing to make those investments, I do not think we'll get anywhere.
Deepak Patel is the head of climate finance at the South African Presidential Climate Commission, and he ended off our discussion there looking at the need for partnerships. He was, of course, referring to partnerships between the public and private sector, but partnerships between countries can also provide a useful approach to tackling projects related to building climate resilience. We get into the detail of that on the other side of this, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Insights from Africa, and we're taking a look at climate change, its impact on Africa, and how nations are looking at ways to tackle some of the challenges. Ahead of the break, it was noted that public-private partnerships are one of the options open to African nations as countries look to initiate projects that ensure economies are protected from some of the shocks of climate change. And in that vein, partnerships between nations comes up as a solution as well. The Lesotho Highlands Water Project stands as an example of this. It's an initiative between Lesotho and South Africa, where Lesotho generates hydropower from the project and South Africa is supplied with water. I sat down with Tente Tente, the CEO of the Lesotho Highlands Development Authority, to discuss the intricacies of a bi-national project in securing an important resource like water. Let's take a look.
There is advantages of it being bi-national. It has a very stable governance system, which is making sure that construction is infamous for its corruptions and the likes. So the stable governance system takes care of that risk of corruption. But it makes it complex because we are in the middle of it. As the LADA, our decisions are informed by technical requirements more than what each of the parties require. But you find often we get accused of favoring one party over the other. But the real thing is our decisions are informed by the technical requirements. So luckily, we have the treaty that was signed in 1986. Many people believe the treaty is not perfect. It has its shortcomings, but it has survived for the past 40 years. It has survived the apartheid government. It survived during the military rule in South Africa. It's surviving several government regimes under the democratic world in both countries. So there must be something right that the treaty is doing. So I always say it was far ahead of its time, because even other countries come to Lesotho to learn how the governance, how the treaty is working out, so they can implement the same on the other side, because nobody ever understands to say, Lesotho is such a small country. How are you able to be equal partners with South Africa with such a large financial muscle? Everybody thought South Africa will just bulldoze the decisions. That is not the case. So it is the blueprint of how you do transboundary projects.
Do you see, we highlighted that this is almost the gold standard we're not saying that it's perfect, but we are saying that it does provide this blueprint for other nations to potentially follow. Do you think we could get a lot more benefit from using resources in this way? If you think about perhaps like Victoria Falls, there are many resources that are shared on borders. Do you think we're getting the maximum amount out of it? Or is this idea of collaboration between two countries still something that people need to get across?
No, it is partly a solution. And as you can see, there are already others following suit. Botswana has shown interest in coming into Lesotho and tapping into this very same commodity. And there is a 700-kilometer pipeline that's been built from Lesotho to Botswana. And in so doing, Where do you get the pipe through? You get it through South Africa. And South Africa also had to jump in on the same collaboration to say, if you are going to pass certain towns along South Africa, then we'll be able to tap into the same water. So they are clubbing together in terms of financial resources, even skills and expertise. And it's now collaboration between the three countries. And now today we are talking about the impacts of climate change. It doesn't recognize the boundaries. The effects of climate change will be felt from Lesotho, South Africa, Botswana, and Namibia. So collaboration between the countries is absolutely important. We are now living in one global world.
Tente Tente is the CEO of the Lesotho Highlands Development Authority. Well, it's not only governments that are taking up the call to solve for climate change, businesses are too. Africa's largest bank by assets, Standard Bank, has its own sustainability strategy and approach when it comes to climate change, particularly when it comes to energy. It's noted energy security as a key driver of economic growth. And while it's a big supporter of green energy, the firm has come under fire by activists to curb its lending to the coal, oil and gas sectors. And so with all of this in mind, I caught up with Luvuyo Masinda, the Chief Executive for Corporate and Investment Banking at Standard Bank, for his take on what a just transition is and how that informs its approach to the energy sector. Let's take a look.
Just recognizes, in our views, that Africa and many countries on the continent are in different positions and situations, both as it relates to the climate impact, which has been severe in many of our markets, as well as, on the contrary, the issue of energy poverty. The fact that there are still 600 million people across the continent who don't have access to energy. Secondly, it also recognizes the fact that there's quite a lot of investment to help people get out of poverty in the continent. And so when you think about just, in our mind, you have to think about all of these factors and take them into effect as you decide where you invest and how you move forward as each of the countries and the region. Transition, though, also recognizes that we have to transition away from fossil fuels-driven energy production. And as a result, as a bank, we've committed over 450 billion rand as a new target to mobilize capital towards efforts of sustainable finance.
And that's exactly it, right? These things don't happen overnight. There is, in fact, a transition that happens. Are banks then the facilitators of this transition? Is that how we should see this?
I think there are a lot of players who need to participate in this transition. Banks by themselves would definitely not have the capacity as it relates to the financing. I think in most of the markets that we operate in, the policy landscape has definitely moved forward, because I think there's a big part of policymakers that is required. And we are starting to see, even on the mobilizing of capital, that participants broader than just commercial banks, whether it's FDIs or other multilaterals, are starting to participate much more meaningfully. And South Africa is actually a very good example if you think about the program that has been running in South Africa the best part of the last 10 years and has seen a lot of investment come into the space. Having said all of that, we are nowhere near the level of investments required to achieve some of the targets that has been mentioned. And so we see our role very critical in finding the pools of capital that sits not necessarily in the banking system only, but sits in various pockets globally that we think can be mobilized, and if it can be mobilized cheaper, even better.
Even better indeed, because that's what it has to be, right? Capital has to be, one, accessible, and two, affordable.
Absolutely.
If we talk about capital and we talk about investing, as you have as the bank, how does it move beyond just the traditional sense, really, of providing capital? Because often when we talk about investing in climate, investing in the just transition, those products are actually quite different to what traditional products are. Are you finding that to be the case, where often this finance comes with sustainable goals that need to be met as a result of it? How is that landscape developing when you look at financing certain projects in this arena?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think the need to mobilize capital that's affordable is driving a lot of innovation. As also, I suppose, seen a mobilization from different parts and players on the continent who are making the point that perhaps the cost that the region in general raises finance is unfairly unaffordable. And so there is what we need to do within the continent and leveraging different instruments that risk mitigate some of what people would view as risk. And so we do a lot of instruments now, packages, which pulls from different pockets of funding, sometimes real capital, sometimes instruments that really help risk mitigate, whether it's political risk or currency risk, which often is a big issue in this continent. But the key issue and the key driver is that this innovation is driven by the need to make this capital really affordable. And I suspect you'll see much more, increase in the pace of this innovation in the coming years.
We've spoken a lot about finance and how to get that right and to get it at a price point that is affordable. But the role that Standard Bank can play as well, I believe, as a continental bank, surely comes with some kind of advisory capacity as well. You're in territories across the continent and, highlighting at the beginning that it's not a one-size-fits-all. How does that factor into how you perhaps filling an advisory role in the climate debates and changes that are coming?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question as well. I think the starting point for us is, captured very well in our purpose statement as a group, that Africa is a home of driver growth. And what that means is the role that we play has to solve some of the biggest challenges that the continent faces. And it's one of the key reasons we'd identified energy security and transition, as well as infrastructure, as some of the most important things that the continent requires to resolve. And we see a clear, obvious role for us as a financial institution that goes beyond, as you rightly put, just mobilizing capital. At the heart of it is about influencing policy, providing advisory services to both the governments, the local players, matching them to key contractors that sits globally and leveraging our network that sits outside of the continent. And so when we think about our role that we play in the space, you're absolutely right. It's beyond just financing. It leverages all of our expertise within the bank, including advisory.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of Insights from Africa. But if you want more content like this, or if you want to rewatch any of the discussions we've had on the show, you can find them on Business Day TV's YouTube channel. Just look under the Insights from Africa tab. And if you follow us on social media, you can stay up to date with all our content. So be sure to find us on X, TikTok and LinkedIn. But for now, from me, Bronwyn Seaborn, and the rest of the team, it's goodbye. Until next time.
Insights from Africa is brought to you in partnership with Standard Bank.